One. Welcome back, everybody, to Philosophy for the People. We have a new guest today. Very excited to welcome Parker. I didn't even ask you how to pronounce your last name. Is it? Do it for me so I don't.
No, I want to hear you do it, man. Let me hear.
Parker. Oh man, it's gonna be embarrassing. Settecase.
That's it.
Is it Settecase? Okay, the first one.
They're both right. They're both right. So if I was back in Palermo, Sicily, they'd say Settecase, you know. But yeah, it's Settecase here. It's
I was reaching. I was like,
you got them both, man.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice job.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, great to have you here, Parker. You host a really cool show. I've caught some of your content before, just doing really good stuff. I want to make sure we talk about that and promote that as well. So we got connected, online, and you're doing a lot of work in philosophy of religion, it seems, which is, what we're deeply interested in here. Sorry, there's a train that runs right behind my house.
I can almost hear it from how close we are.
And it only comes by when I start a podcast. It's like it knows when I'm starting the podcast and it runs by. And you've been thinking about the simulation hypothesis and AI and all this stuff. And you kind of pulled me back into this because, I don't know, maybe like a year and a half ago, I had a couple of conversations on this with people like Tyler McNabb and Lydia McGrew and Jim Anderson. I haven't thought about it a whole lot since then. So it's fun to kind of like come back into the matrix, if you will. And we're going to talk about that today. But first, since this is your first time on the show, please introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And what are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah, totally. So again, thanks for having me, man. I think we're doing a lot of the same stuff. So I'm really happy to collaborate. So then I don't have to be like envious of you or anything like that. No, that's my friend, dude. We're cool. So
I'm envious of your mustache, brother. Man. I just like
you got the beard, man. If I could, I would have one like yours, but I can't. I'm a master's student working on my third master's. This one's in philosophy of religion at Palm Beach Atlantic University.
Nice.
Focusing on like philosophy of mind type stuff. Yeah, I got a systematic theology degree, theological studies degree. Got them all for free. So as long as people can give me free degrees, I will collect them the rest of my life.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I got to have them all. Thanos or Pokemon, whatever your thing is.
It's Pokemon.
That's good. That's good. So yeah, that's me, man. And I really like thinking about the simulation hypothesis. I got into it begrudgingly because I work with college athletes and all of them listen to Joe Rogan. Some of them listen to Lex Friedman, and we'd be talking about Christ and God, the creator. And people would be like, well, what if we live in a computer simulation? I'm like, what, why? Huh? No, why? And so then I want to take things seriously. I always want to be, I want to be over prepared. I want to be like stupid, overly prepared for stuff. I hate getting out over my skis. So I'm like, let me just go read some stuff on this. And then I got sucked in deeper and deeper. And I like trying to refute it. That's fun. But also, it's fun to think like, what if we are living in a computer simulation? Would that make my Christian faith untrue? Well, why think that? So there's a couple routes that I like to go. One is just like a straightforward refutation of it. Others are like, well, let's, stipulate it that it is true. What does that do to Christian faith? And then it helps us think through the nature of God, the nature of humanity. Like it's a pretty cool thing to think about, actually.
It is. Yeah. And there's a lot of different ways you can take it. So let me throw out a few things and get your thoughts on it, right? One is like, I guess if you're making a philosophical case for God, it seems like the simulation scenario hypothesis would be relevant to some approaches and not relevant to others. So say you got like a contingency argument that works. Okay. Simulation hypothesis doesn't seem relevant, but the contingency argument doesn't show that that's false either, right? It'd just be like, we could be in a simulation that's ultimately in a world created by God, right? So it's like, okay. And then you have to maybe make some argument of why God wouldn't allow that, or some philosophy of mind that's incompatible with that. Like there's other steps you would have to take, but it would, at least that would show that like the simulation hypothesis doesn't like do all the theoretical work that needs to be done, right? At least on some level. Whereas maybe it might be a little bit more interruptive for like teleological arguments or something like that, right? And I suppose that there's different moves you can make, which we're probably going to get into related to your argument around that as well. And then, maybe you could do some philosophy of mind and say, well, simulation hypothesis assumes these positions in philosophy of mind, and maybe these aren't good positions, right? So maybe that's a way we could go. We could go Kantian with some transcendental arguments. So it's like the cool thing about this is there's like lots of different ways you could approach it, So like this is typical philosophy. To ask like one question is to ask all questions. But I like what you're saying too. It's like, okay, even if we like granted this, right? what would be the consequences of that, right?
Mhm.
Like, what would be the religious consequences? What would be the moral consequences? And I know that's some of the things that Chalmers explores in his book,
Right.
Reality Plus. Like, okay, say we are in a virtual world. Like, what does that mean, in terms of meaning and morality and stuff? And
Yeah.
yeah, those are kind of interesting things to think about, I suppose. So sorry, I just put a lot on the table there, Parker, but
No, it's
jam
awesome,
on
dude.
jam on any of it that you want to. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and I'd love to keep like I like the style of your show because it's conversational. So I genuinely like getting people's thoughts on this as well.
Mhm.
So I'm pumped to hear what you have to say about it. One of the really fun things is some Christians are kind of torn on this, and some are like, yeah, whatever. If we live in a computer simulation, yeah, it's like a metaphor for God. God's our simulator, and it brings in the old debates on theological language.
Yeah.
Is this an analogy? Is it a metaphor? Are we speaking univocally? It looks like the only problem is if you think that God is univocally a computer simulator, like Chalmers goes in for. If you're saying that no, literally a computer programmer in base reality, and in base reality, naturalistic evolution led to him. It's like,
Yeah.
well, okay, that's a huge problem. Yeah, no, that's not what we take God to be. But then also, if you're reasoning to a simulator in our world because of the apparent design going on, then why wouldn't you do that in base reality as well? Right.
Right.
So you can slip it all the way back through, which is really fun.
Yeah.
I used
That's an interesting point,
yeah,
right? So like
yeah,
even back
yeah.
when I used to fancy myself a naturalist of sorts, before I really started looking into a lot of this stuff and became convinced of the theistic picture.
Yeah.
And I remember like just first, entertaining the simulation hypothesis years and years ago, right? And like just finding it a little bit ironic. It's for the reasons you pointed out. It's like, hold on, like the whole reason you guys are sort of entertaining this is like you're kind of admitting
Yeah.
that the world seems designed.
Yeah.
Which we're supposed to be arguing is not the case, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Which is it, right? Yeah.
Well, and that's a really fun one because yeah, like you said, some naturalists want to be like, no, it's not designed, or it's the blind watchmaker or something like that.
Yeah.
If it is designed, it's not by a rational agent. But then other people are like, well, look, someone posed a teleological argument of whatever stripe to me, and I can cut that off by saying, hey, look, here's a human simulator or alien simulator, one level of reality below us, but I have less ontological commitments because I don't need an immaterial thing. I'm a full blown naturalist, materialistic, whatever.
Mhm.
And so there is no supernatural stuff. So I have a more sparse ontology than you.
Yeah.
You're like, well, okay, but you don't have an explanation. So now we have theoretical explanations going at each other, theoretical virtues going at each
Right.
other.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I value explanatory power and depth, and you're valuing simplicity, but you're forgetting that inherent to simplicity claims is like a ceteris paribus,
Yeah.
however they say the Latin, right? Someone's gonna be
Other
upset
things
by that.
equal, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So like not all things are equal because one has more explanatory power than the other. I don't care how simple it is if it can't explain the phenomena, right?
Right.
So it's just super fun because
Yeah.
now you're
Good point
battling
there.
over this stuff.
Yeah, and let's battle that out a little bit more because man, I always challenge that simplicity claim, right? Just
Mm.
having, that's like the simplistic way to evaluate simplicity
Mm.
because clearly having the alien designer or the computer designer has a lot of more components, I would argue,
Mm.
at the fundamental level of ways that things could go wrong
Yeah.
than at least the traditional understanding of classical theism, right?
Yeah.
And how you look at like your fundamental theory is your lens, right? That it's not just like we're viewing all of reality in the same way. If we just swap in different fundamental theories, like how we view
Right.
reality as a naturalist with an alien designer at the bottom is totally different in
Yeah.
all of its commitments than if you're a classical theist. One weird way to illustrate this, I think, is the case, right? If you're a classical theist, but also an idealist, you can shave a bunch of categories by just saying everything's mind dependent. There's
Right.
nothing mind independent, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's not going to be the case, right? With a different fundamental. So it's like how you interpret the things on top depends on what's on bottom. That like these things, well, my ontology is linear. That's a stupid way. That's a stupid way of evaluating simplicity, right? That
Yeah.
is a simplistic way.
Yeah.
It's not that simple, right? It just isn't.
Yeah.
And even if you posit one more thing or one more kind of thing at the bottom layer, if that thing does a lot of unifying and synthesizing work of everything on top, I would argue you actually have an increase of simplicity at the end of the day, right? so maybe those are some points for the theist, is that like once you get past like the very simplistic assertion of simplicity from the naturalist, simulation hypothesis side, I think the story actually starts to point in a different direction. Sorry, I just whenever that point gets brought up, it always excites me. Yeah.
It's so good. And it is complicated too, because it's like, well, what do you mean by supernatural and natural? It's like, well, no, I'll just grant that you're saying that immaterial or something like that. And you go, well, yeah, if that's, you're supposed to cut things off that don't add to the story. So if this one is doing a lot of explanatory power, if it's doing a lot of explaining, then you can't cut this off. This is like the foundation, right? I actually wanted to pause on that point and get your thoughts on this. So you said the fundamental theory that does a lot of guiding for the rest, like the ground matters. I've been thinking about this a lot because I think that there's not really a Christian worldview. I think that there's like a Christian meta narrative, creation, fall, redemption, consummation. If you're a Christian, you have to believe these things.
Yep.
But if you're a classical theist, you're going to have a different worldview than a neoclassical theist.
100%, hugely different. Yeah.
Time, space, usually the neoclassical guys are like A theorists and the classical guys are B theorists. It's like your worldviews don't actually match up, like when you put them on top of each other. And that's all right, but it's not like the Christian worldview. You could say the Christian narrative or meta narrative or something, but I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm quite partial to classical theism for various reasons. And there are classical theists that are, A theorists and B theorists. So they're actually kind of
people mix and match, right?
Yeah. Pick whatever you fancy, right?
Yeah.
It's like facial hair. So no, that's right. And like one of the things to me that sort of appealed to me about classical theism that might be relevant, and I think neoclassical theism could satisfy at least this criteria, depending on how you cash it out as well, is that, okay, we're kind of looking for that fundamental theory that can explain the most with the least, right? And there's this list of broad features of reality that need to be explained, and there's all these sorts of things, right? All these sorts of categories that just are not intrinsically self-explanatory. They're always kind of pointing beyond themselves. They're the sort of thing that is not intrinsically completely intelligible. They seem to be the sorts of things that require a cause, right? Using the term broadly, right? Okay, changing things, composite things, finite things, these things seem to be the sorts of things that we just don't want to leave brute. Okay, so if we're going to get like a big juicy explanation of everything, like the juiciest, like as juicy as your mustache, right? We need to like kind of escape those categories, right? So now we're starting to get a picture of a fundamental reality that is, immutable, non-composite, simple, right? Eternal, right? And so to me, that was like one of the biggest motivations for classical theism. It just seems like we need these category shifts, right? If we're going to get like a big, juicy, principled, totally satisfying explanation. And not that I can comprehend that, but like if reality is fully intelligible, there has to be the sort of thing that could be completely intrinsically intelligible, unrestrictedly intelligible, that could, in a weird way, explain itself while explaining everything else. And it just seems like a cosmic computer designer definitely doesn't escape the relevant categories.
See what I mean? That's good. That is good. And I think that is a win for classical theism, where it's like, well, no, you go in full stop on like immutability and well, actually, I don't know. It seems like you may have just stepped over incomprehensibility there with intelligibility stuff.
Yeah, so incomprehensible to us.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah, as finite beings. Yeah.
So like these are incommunicable attributes, right? So very obviously do not fit with a computer simulator. Whereas maybe definitely like process theology, but maybe even like the neoclassical guys, whether or not their process, I'll leave to you. But yeah, like those attributes look like they're a little bit more communicable than some of the classical ones. So I think that's a win. Yeah.
But your point is still super relevant to this conversation. It's like, okay, if we're looking for ultimate explanation, maybe we get approximate explanation from the simulation designer or whatever it is. Call it the local God, right? Lowercase g God.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's just approximate explanation, right? And then the question is, if we still need that ultimate explanation, do we need the proximate one? Like, is that really doing any important work in the middle there, right?
Right. And so it may even be the case, right? Like it may be the case that we live in a computer simulation, but when we're comparing the theories between base level theism
Mhm.
and like theism plus, theism plus simulation, like we ought to cut off the simulation if it's not doing any explanatory work, even if we are living in a computer simulation. And this is a point that I make, which is not super great, but it's like it's more of an epistemological point than a metaphysical one, where it's like,
Mhm.
hey, I think even if we live in a computer simulation, we may not be justified in believing that. And I have several arguments on that, which is like, I don't know. Some people are like, well, that's just skepticism. It's like, well, no, I'm just saying, like, look, I don't know if we can straight up refute it, but I think we can uh, give it an undercutting defeater.
Yeah. Yeah, do you want we should get into some of that now.
Yeah.
There was one other thing I was thinking of, but it just that that silly
Sorry, man.
train,
That
man.
stupid
The
train.
simulator keeps sending this
That's
train
right.
by just
That's
to
right.
annoy me,
Let,
so
let me let me lay out Chalmers' reasoning, because maybe some people are like not in with us and they're not getting. Hey, why would anyone think that we live in a computer simulation at all?
yeah, there's smart people that are really advancing this thesis, so it's not just like Pat and Parker just like being weird, right?
Dude,
Mhm.
totally. And a lot of the Christian philosophers, I know a lot of them. They're my friends, and they're like, Parker, man, you got to stop. Why do you keep hammering the simulation hypothesis? I'm like, dude, you guys don't get it. The college kids all ask me about it all the time, and they're like, hey, have you ever heard of the simulation hypothesis? I'm like, yeah, dude, I've been obsessing over it for 5 years now. So let's
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah, well, first, real quick before we get into that, it's like it's just kind of funny how the skeptical scenarios just kind of like morph with the age, right?
Yeah.
Before it was demons, right? Then
Yeah.
it's brain in a vat. Now it's computer simulation, right? What should next one
Yeah.
be, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and like so Nick Bostrom is kind of the fountainhead of this modern
Mhm.
version, and he's like, look, this isn't a skeptical scenario. You still have knowledge, and you still can know stuff, and you can still have a rich life. And then Chalmers kind of picked up the ball and ran with it even further, and is like, no, yeah, there's no skepticism at all, like absolutely, and he just keeps going. So that's maybe one
It's a
important
wonderful thing to
difference.
assert, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but I
yeah.
want something a little bit more thick than
Right,
that, right?
right.
Yeah.
So
Because unless you really restrict it, it is hard to constrain this from becoming a globally skeptical scenario, right?
Well,
Uh-huh.
so that's what I think. And
Mhm.
I think it doesn't, I think it actually ends up becoming just self-defeating only for the simulation hypothesis. And I do want to raise that and get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
Sorry. Mhm.
but because a lot of my philosopher friends are like, no, that's actually an illicit move and you can't do that. And others have been like, that's genius. So we'll see. But here's why people.
Philosophers disagree. I don't believe
I
it.
know, right? Yeah, and they're pulling me apart at the seams because
Mhm.
they don't agree with each other on my podcast. Um,
Right.
it's just tough. So Chalmers gives a pretty interesting argument. There's the simulation argument from Nick Bostrom, which I'm sure you know about, but it's like,
Yeah, we've covered this before. I think that was the one I covered. I think with Jim Madden, we went
okay,
into it.
yeah,
Yeah.
folks, go check that one out, and so then we
Mhm.
don't have to like repristinate it here.
Mhm.
But one of the three propositions is true. Either we'll never make a simulated world with virtual conscious beings that have experiences like ours. So like there's something it's like to be me. If we can never make a world like that, then we're not living in a computer simulation. Two, maybe we could make that, but we won't for maybe moral reasons. Maybe humanity comes together and says it's really immoral to make conscious simulated beings. There's like an anti-natalist
Mhm.
type move there. Or three, you're already probably living in a computer simulation, or you're probably already living in a computer simulation. Why? Because there would be all these nested ones. If you could make a simulation sufficiently advanced enough to have digital or simulated conscious beings, then presumably they could do that as well.
Yep.
And then you just look, the majority of conscious beings that have experiences like us in the universe would be simulated, like billions and trillions and trillions and trillions, all nested all the way down.
Mhm.
And so the probability that just happen to be in base reality is super, super low. So
Right.
you
Mhm.
throw in this indifference principle and you say, if most people are X, then I'm probably X. If most people are simulated, then I'm probably simulated. So Chalmers actually he modifies that a little bit in his book, but he also goes in a really cool direction and says, hey, look, if teleology is evidence for a designer, then we have a parity, or we have a symmetry between two hypotheses.
Right.
There's a designer, just granted. Okay, cool. Either that designer is a cosmic god, like the Abrahamic god, like classical god, or it's a local god, that it's just a simulator.
Right.
And so then I develop his argument a little bit more because his book is written at the popular level. Not like I'm doing him any favors or anything. The dude's a really good philosopher, but I just made it some premises. He says there's a symmetry between local God and cosmic God, but we break the symmetry because a cosmic God would have to be worthy of worship. And he says, no possible being can be worthy of worship. He
Mhm.
kind of just says it, he just
It's
kind of
kind of like takes James Rachel's line, just right.
yeah. And he just like, it's a little bit of an assertion. He might, I'm kind of confused by it, honestly, but I think that he's going in for like, conceivability as a guide in metaphysics, and he can't
Mhm.
conceive of anything that would make a being worthy of worship. But I point out in the paper that he does say, like, if he was in the presence of a cosmic God, he might be thankful, he might be grateful, he might, all these things that Christians do when we worship God. But he basically says he wouldn't like prostrate fall. He wouldn't, fall prostrate on his face and say, "I worship you." It's like, well, it looks like in the Bible when that happens, that's an involuntary act. It doesn't look like people are, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
worship is not just saying I worship, it's directing your whole life. It's singing, it's being grateful, it's acknowledging who God is, and his nature. So it looks like Chalmers would worship God, but by his own admission.
And if people want, I did an episode on that with Dr. Mark Spencer, and he thinks that actually beauty is a way to ground
Mm,
worship worthiness with God. He
mm,
takes an interesting approach, a little different than other classical theists on that. So I'll just kind of gesture in that direction if people want to pursue that
that's
kind of
awesome.
thought. Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
awesome. Yeah. So there's a couple reasons. Another way. So I try to say, hey, look, here's two defeaters for Chalmers' argument. One is it looks like a rebutting defeater because Chalmers seems to acknowledge that he would worship God. So that looks like there is a being who could be worthy of worship. It'd be this cosmic God. So then the symmetry breaker is not doing any work. So we're back to symmetry. And the other one is to say, it looks like Chalmers is giving like a really weak epistemic claim, where a strong modal one is concerned, because he's like, or is needed, because to say no being is possibly worthy of worship, or there is no possible being that's worthy, or that's a property that cannot be instantiated, like that's a really strong claim. I need some evidence for that, because
Mhm.
most people in humanity throughout history have thought that beings can be worthy of worship.
That's why they make sacrifices.
Everyone, like, dude, so many people throughout history have worshipped something and thought there are things that are worthy of worship,
Mhm.
God or otherwise. So there's two potential defeaters, and I think that just kind of gets us back to the symmetry. And so then I throw in my own symmetry breakers from metaethical concerns, like God can ground moral truths and moral facts in ways that a simulator cannot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really good, right? So, okay, let's say we've got various teleological arguments, right? And there's a family of arguments here, and I'd have to think about. So, just take like fine tuning.
Yeah.
It's certainly not totally novel to throw out an alternative designer to try and stalemate fine tuning. I mean, this is your evil God hypothesis,
Right.
right?
Right.
Okay, fine, right? But a lot of contemporary theists really position fine tuning as something that's confirmatory of a hypothesis that's independently argued for or
Right.
evidenced already, right?
Right.
Or part of a cumulative case.
Uh-huh.
Aquinas would take a different approach with his fifth way, I would argue, right, where it's a much more metaphysical analysis going through act and potency that will just bring along a whole bunch of metaphysical commitments that will just get you to
Yeah.
one and only one possible explanation for this, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that sort of teleological argument would be affected much by the simulation hypothesis. I would need to think about that
Yeah.
more. Almost certainly not, actually, now that I think about it a little bit. But the more contemporary ones, like fine tuning, I guess the first thing I would make, and this seems like what you're doing, is like, well, look, there's all these other things that seem that we need to explain. You brought up moral facts and more knowledge, right?
Yeah.
We want to ground those too. We mentioned contingency earlier, maybe consciousness itself, but I guess that's kind of going into this, right? And that'll bring us into philosophy of mind, right? Like,
Yeah.
what sort of philosophy of minds are compatible or not compatible? How plausible are those, right? So yeah, continue your line of thought. So you just
Yeah.
focus on the moral dimension then as kind of
Yeah.
being
And I
initially.
was writing the paper for a meta ethics class. So I'm like, all right, well, this is my way of shoehorning this back in. Um,
Good.
So that was cool, but there's lots more, right? So there's like any metaphysical grounding argument, like if you're grounding the laws of logic in the mind of God or in the character of God, or anything, any of those grounding arguments, they look like any kind of necessary truths, moral, rational, whatever, logical. Those are going to be necessary. They're true in every possible world. But this simulator exists in base reality. There's no reason to think that the simulator is multi-dimensional, multi-world. What is planning to use? Cross world. When he
Trans world.
trans world depravity. Yeah, he's not. There's no reason to think he's trans world. And if you do start thinking the simulator is trans world, like base reality, not across simulated worlds, well, now we're starting to talk about God a little bit here. So, right. So that's just God by another name. So if you're saying simulator, but you've taken all the content out of that and added in the attributes of God, okay, but that's God, by another name. So any of these any kind of like modal grounding, that's going to shoot right back through however many simulations we live in, back to base reality, back to a creator God, which is pretty fun. I like those.
Yeah, that is fun. That's really fun. And then I'd be curious too, again, because one of the kind of classic cliched lines of who designed the designer type objection, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I know theists and Christians kind of laugh at that one, but it's not a totally illegitimate objection, right?
Huh.
And in fact, it's sort of what has in the great perennial philosophy motivated these strong simplicity claims about God.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like, look, compositeness properly understood, and Aquinas has his specific list of things that he thinks are composite in a relevant sense, demanding extrinsic cause, act, potency, substance, accident, so on and so forth, right? Anything that is composite in that sense is just the sort of thing that's always pointing beyond itself, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, if you wind up with some sort of designer that still has complexity in that sense, even the theist would be like, yeah, who designed a designer, right?
Yeah.
And then in that sense, it's you haven't, maybe you have reasons, right, to think that there's still a designer of this universe, but we haven't hit bedrock, right? We haven't gone far enough in terms of ultimate explanation. I'm not charging Chalmers of inconsistency. I'd just be curious of, on the one hand, we know that naturalists are very resistant to design arguments because who designed a designer?
Yeah.
Yet, in a conversation 30 minutes later, somebody like Sam Harris will posit a designer, right?
Yeah. And so Chalmers actually says he thinks that this is the best argument for God's existence that he's ever seen. But then he goes in and says, because of worship worthiness, I don't think it's the classic God. So he's like, yeah, there is a God, but it's maybe a 13-year-old girl in base reality, which is pretty wild. But
now let me ask you this real quick, because
the
skeptical scenarios, right? It's like, why on earth, right? If that possibility is open, that it's some, somebody drinking a lot of Mountain Dew, right, in their underwear in grandma's basement, right? Boy, and they're in charge of my cognitive faculties. I don't know, man. That makes me a little bit nervous.
Yeah. So that's part of, let's just go there, because that's part of my argument that I always get hit with. I've been working on it for a couple of years, and I've asked some epistemologists, and this is just where it's at today. So if someone sees a problem with it, just go ahead and comment. Like, I want to hear it. But I think you're right. So I would say a necessary condition. I have it written down in so it's all like sloppy and all.
Yeah, good. No, that's good.
Yeah. A necessary condition of being a rational agent or being rational is that one at least implicitly trusts their knowledge processes.
Right.
So I'm trying to pick my words here. I would say reasoning process, but let's say belief forming or knowledge forming.
Belief forming mechanisms.
Yeah,
broadly,
sure.
Right?
I don't want to say I want to be careful not to use too much Plantinga language, because then all the other folks are like, no, I'm jumping off board. So let's say knowledge forming processes. A necessary condition, being rational, is that one must at least implicitly trust their knowledge forming processes to reliably lead to true beliefs. It seems like pretty uncontrovertible, or uncontroversial at least. So 2, if you come to believe that you live in a computer simulation, then you have a reason not to trust that your reasoning processes reliably lead you to true beliefs. And we'll talk about that because that's the important one.
Yeah.
So then, conclusion, it's not rational to believe you're living in a computer simulation. So why premise 2? Why, if you come to believe that you live in a computer simulation, would you have a reason not to trust? So I don't mean you have a reason to distrust. I just mean you have a reason maybe to withhold trust in your
Right.
cognitive faculties. Why? Because the story that you're telling, you say that you live in a computer simulation. Um, what's the goal of the simulator? If it's like a Bostrom type simulation, which that's the real popular one, well then we're an ancestor simulation of our future folks, our future ancestors simulating our world to see what would happen. So on the popular level, people would say, obviously we live in a computer simulation because of the 2016 election. There's no way Trump was supposed to win. The simulator said, how funny would that be? And they want to mess
Right.
with stuff, right?
I just think of how I used to play The Sims when I was a teenager, man. I was just a jerk, right?
Yeah, my friends, but they'd always drop them in the water and make them drown. I was like,
Right.
dang, this is pretty dark.
People are sick, right?
Yeah. But so if you come to believe that you live in a computer simulation, I'm not saying that you have a reason to doubt all of your beliefs or that they're vertical or that your knowledge forming processes consistently or reliably lead to truth. I'm saying that it seems like it's inscrutable.
Yeah.
Like if what were you made for? Were you made, like, if they can just switch up the script all the time on you,
Mhm.
or if you live in a dating app like from Black Mirror or something, what's your purpose? Like, do you have normal knowledge forming processes? Why think that? I just don't know. If it's a computer simulator and it's not a necessary being, necessarily good, who has designed us to think his thoughts after him, if you don't have that kind of story going on, then what is the story that we live in? And it seems like it might be inscrutable, whether or not your belief forming, knowledge forming processes do reliably produce true beliefs.
Right. Yeah. I think that is I think that is correct, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's certain epistemological assumptions going on, and clever people will have clever responses to that.
Yeah.
But if I seriously thought that this scenario is true, I would be radically skeptical. I would.
Mm,
I,
yeah.
I would.
Well, so
Now, at the same time, I think that the radical skepticism is totally unlivable. So maybe that would just, reverse into being a good reason for me to
okay.
reject
Well,
the computer
so
simulation.
that's the thing, because it does hook back on itself.
Mhm.
My one of my friends, Jim Slagle, has written this amazing book, the
The
epistemological.
skyhook, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
epistemological skyhook. So yeah, I think it does hook back on itself because your belief that you live in a computer simulation is also produced by these knowledge forming processes that you don't trust anymore, or that you withhold trust in.
Right.
So then why believe that you live in a computer simulation, right? So like once it comes back around and hooks on or hits or hammers or targets that belief, then you don't have, I think it's undercutting. I think it's an undercutting defeater. You don't have, it's not warranted or it's not justified, however you're cashing
Yeah.
that out. And so then you let go of that one and then you have the rest of your beliefs back. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like if it is radical global skepticism, it hits all your beliefs, including that one. But once it hits that belief, you don't have it any longer and you can have the rest of your beliefs.
Yeah. So again, I think that all sounds totally right. And there's also it's just like the kind of more basic point is like all the knowledge we have about evolution and computers and even ourselves, is from a fake world, right?
Yeah. That's James Anderson makes that point where he's like,
Right.
the only reason I got here was because I was climbing this ladder of technological development. I look at the past 50 years and I project in the future and go, dude, of course we're going to be able to have these, metaversal situations. But if none of that history is actually like veridical, then why am I climbing up this ladder in the first place? Like, no, that was all. What if this?
To
You
think
get
this
all the
reflects real base reality, right?
exactly.
Mhm.
Why think that?
Mhm.
How would we know? And it's not like you have a reason to disbelieve that. Maybe you would. Maybe you have more reason to disbelieve that if you think you live in a computer simulation. But it's just you just don't know. So how am I even doing this reasoning anymore? So Anderson's like, yeah, it's the Wittgensteinian, ladder kick. You're climbing up this ladder
Right.
and you realize it's not a good ladder anyways.
Right. Yeah. Again, this all seems to be a host of serious epistemological issues with the scenario. I guess one thing I have get your thoughts on it that I haven't thought about a whole lot as much. I remember reading one from I think it was Alex Proust a while ago, that he just had like a simple argument against being a computer simulation. It was that we would expect it to be of actually pretty poor quality and limited scope, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And given that that's clearly not the case, then probably we should think that we're not in a
Yeah.
computer simulation, right?
Yeah, Mike Humer makes the same argument against brain in a vat skepticism,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, look, the probability that we're living in an intelligible, I'll say computer simulation instead of brain in a vat
Why
scenario.
not a little bit more glitchy, like my computer screen? You know?
Yeah, right. Maybe you are, and I'm not.
Right.
But it's like, look, what's the probability? Most computer simulations would just be fuzz. It would just be white noise or whatever.
Yeah.
If you're just generating them randomly, and so then the odds, again, you use the same indifference principle that
Mhm.
Bostrom was using to motivate simulation, his simulation argument.
Mhm.
You use the same thing. If most worlds are fuzzy, then I would probably be in that fuzzy. What are the odds that I'm living in a intelligible world? So then you say, well, no, this is intended by the creators or creator of the simulation. But then as you're adding in more and more constraints, you're making the probability go down and down and down. And for a Bayesian like Mike Humer, that's no good. You're
That's right.
losing credibility or plausibility in your theory.
Right, and Humer is himself, I think he's just sort of broadly agnostic, right? But
Yeah.
yeah. So it's his book. I read his one on knowledge recently. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
I don't remember the computer stuff in there, but
No, it's a paper. I think the title is like, you're probably not a brain in a vat, maybe.
okay.
And that's something that he's wrote his dissertation on skepticism, and yeah, he's a beast. He's just super reasonable. It's really wild, like
Yeah, his
how
stuff is
reasonable he
fun.
is.
I like
Yeah,
I like his stuff, and his knowledge book was like, it was a fun read too,
yeah. Which is not you don't always say that about philosophy books, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was self-published, so I think that helps. He gave himself a
Yeah,
little bit more, I guess,
yeah,
flexibility there. But to me, I enjoy that because, like,
yeah.
clearly he's already got the chops.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah, it was good. That was good. Cool. All right. So you're making a lot of points, Herb Parker. I'm feeling them. They're good. Again, I'm not, certainly there's clever responses that
Yeah,
could be made to all this. Nobody denies that. But starting to feel like, hey, maybe I'm not in the matrix right now.
that's good.
Cool, right? What else we got? What else we
Well,
want
so
to
I
say?
want to motivate it, because I think some people in your audience, if they're anyone like mine, maybe I bet there's a lot of overlap as well, but people are like, no, we don't live in a computer simulation. That's because the Chinese room argument of John Searle, it's impossible. And
But
so
so like
yeah,
it seems like you need a functionalism or
yeah,
something,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
To be the case for
yeah.
this to be possible. And that's
And
just that's actually David Bentley Hart's. He reviewed Chalmers' book and he's like, look, I can't see a way for this to run without functionalism. And he just calls functionalism a collection of
yeah,
terrible
yeah,
vacuous metaphors, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
David Bentley Hart's, wonderful style, right? Yeah. So yeah, sorry, continue your point.
No,
Yeah.
no worries. But
Mhm.
that's kind of the idea that I don't like anymore. I used to be like that. I used to be like, I know the Chinese room argument, and there's this distinction between syntax and semantics. And look, that might still work against like GoFi theories of AI, good old fashioned
Yeah.
AI. Like
Hmm.
there's just a straight up computation where they're thinking that's what's going to get us to human-like intelligence,
Hmm.
symbol manipulation. But there's lots of different views on this, and some have recursion, and some are like a synthesis of a bunch of different views, and it gets less and less easy to refute just by going in on the syntax semantics
Yeah.
distinction.
Hmm.
But even more than that, uh, two Christian philosophers, Brian Cutter and Kenny Boyce, both substance dualists, they came on my show and kind of persuaded me that if you believe there are psychophysical laws that join our mind and our body and
Hmm.
cause, this interaction between the two, then in principle, it seems like they could be hacked and
Right.
realized in another medium,
Yep.
not just a carbon-based medium. And so
Hmm.
if that's the case, then like maybe you could hack or accidentally cause to arise or whatever, or latch
Sure.
on to
Hmm.
those in a computer simulation. And then I
Yeah.
started thinking more and more about different theories of mind and how they make sense of them. If you're a pan proto-psychist, if you're a
Yep.
panpsychist, if you're a certain other types of functionalists, Schaffer goes in for like a ground functionalism, where he's saying that there's like a metaphysical mind making law, and that sounds a little bit more like theism. I pushed him on that, and he was like, "Well, no." It was really fun actually. He's like, "They're not fundamental, so don't put them down there. There's no God." He's a great guy. But so there's a lot of different theories of mind,
Right,
not
yeah.
just machine functionalism.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, this got brought up in my talk with Josh Rasmussen recently, because I said to him kind of what you're pointing out is like, if could AI become conscious, and what would the implications of that be? And I admitted to saying I don't know, because it seems to me that kind of there's a range of options in terms of philosophy of mind where it seems like the possibility is there that are not just like a sort of reductive materialism, right? And I said, like, even if you're a hylomorphist, right?
Yeah.
There's no reason necessarily to think that matter can't be configured, that it comes predisposed for the giving of a particular form, right?
Yeah.
So I said to Josh, like, I don't know if there's a way you can. And again, this is not an area I've spent a whole lot of time thinking about, but I'm agreeing with you, Parker. I don't think just a sort of, I don't think a rejection of just sort of like your basic mainstream reductive materialism or functionalism totally eliminates the possibility of conscious AI or something like that. So yeah,
and so I do this part to motivate it against like the Christians, where I'm like, this is something to think about. You guys don't get to just say John Searle's name and then you get to win. And and even today, he's been canceled, so you might not want to use his name.
Oh,
that
he
often.
has. That's right. I almost forgot about that.
Yeah.
But by the way, I do like the Chinese. I know there's a huge literature and debate on that, but at the end of the day, I think they're good arguments.
Right?
I think it is a good argument. But even if they're good, I still don't think it totally rules out exactly what we're talking about.
It doesn't give you an excuse not to think about it. That's kind of my point for Christian thinkers. Like, no, you don't get to just do that. This is something, finally, people are dropping the hardcore new atheist view and going in for design stuff. Now it's your time. We've been waiting. We've been here. Yes. Now we're talking about, grand theories of the universe and the nature of God. Embrace the conversation now. Don't just go, well, John Searle, and let me confuse you with some syntax, semantics, and intentionality with an S,
Yeah. That's a wonderful point. And that is right. And it's something I've tried to emphasize, but probably failed, is like, look, there's actually like a lot of cool stuff happening around this. Like, I know, it's weird and it's sort of spooky, but like, to the extent that people are like, getting quite exotic with naturalism, and this all is a very exotic naturalism these days, right? Panpsychism, various simulation hypotheses. Like, this is a really liberal stretch out naturalism that, like, is in many ways getting much closer to a theistic worldview than, and like, you can, one way to see that is actually to see it as some progress is being made, right?
Totally.
Like there's a sort of a concession being made here that, like, look, this sort of hardball physicalism just like isn't really cutting it, right?
Well, and people are talking, Jonathan Schaffer's talking about metaphysical grounding, and it's like, well, yeah, that's what a lot of the medievals were talking about, and they would say different words, but that's really cool. People are getting back into Hexades and Quiddities, and it's like, so some people will say, that the medievals had already said this, and they kind of shut down the conversation. It's like, instead of doing that, just lure them back in. Just lure them. And hey, actually, Bonaventure said this. Can I tell you about that?
Yeah, I don't know if it will. I don't even know if I should say it. But me and another philosopher have a paper under review right now, so I don't know if we'll get anywhere, where we are trying to actually advance that in terms of testing the hypothesis of whether metaphysical grounding is an instance of essentially ordered causation.
Nice.
And because again, I agree with your point. It's like, you don't just have to just be like, oh, by the way, Aquinas already knew all this stuff, right? It's like, no, like, there's actually real, and it also ignores that there's like surely a lot of novel philosophical refinement, right, on the scene today. It's not just like a bunch of like, dunderheads, right? Well, just stumbling into something that genius guy from 1200 already had completely worked out. Not
genius
the case,
man
right?
already had this,
Right?
But if you think Aquinas is like, if you do think he's a genius for coming up with that, or discovering it, or finding it, or being divinely illumined, and this other dude from 2011 also came to that conclusion, if you don't think that he's ripping it off, then you should also think that that guy's pretty smart.
Yeah.
Maybe he's not smart for bailing on the intellectual heritage or whatever, but whatever. Like if he came to that same conclusion, then that's pretty cool. And now you have some common ground to work with.
Yeah, and
That's
seeing
pretty sweet.
convergence around ideas is always a cool thing, to be
Yeah.
sure. So yeah, all to say, I really appreciate your attitude and spirit about this, and
Thanks, man.
definitely agree on all
Yeah.
of it. So yeah.
Well, okay, so let me motivate just a tiny bit more. So
Cool.
I think that maybe you don't think there are psychophysical laws. Okay, then maybe you have a better reason to think that we can't be computationalized. But I just actually bringing up humor again. I just had a podcast episode with him yesterday, and I was asking him about the problem of other minds, and he goes in for an inference to the best explanation. That like I can infer that you have. It's the best explanation. I'm explaining your behaviors with psychological facts. I
Yeah.
think that you have reasons for doing what you're doing, and I kept on hammering the point that like we also have analogy going on because we're of the same kind, and it is reasonable for me to believe that you are. Then it's also reasonable for me to use this inference to the best explanation. But in the case of AI, they're not the same kind as us, and humor kept making this point that the AI engineers are intentionally making them to look as if they are conscious. And so you have a different explanation. The explanation is that they've been designed to look like they're conscious.
Yeah.
I don't
Sort of like
I
a
don't.
magic trick.
Well, yeah, and they're intentionally telling us that they're doing that. Where it's different with us. So maybe if you're a theist, maybe there's a parody, and you go, well, maybe just as the designer designed the AI to look like it's conscious, maybe same with us. But then you go, but I'm conscious, so I have this phenomena to explain about my consciousness. So then that's a disanalogy between you and I thinking that we both have minds versus thinking that Sophia the robot has a mind.
Sure.
So yeah, there's other things. I don't think that machine consciousness will work out, but if it does, I think it would be because they hack the psychophysical laws. Now some people will say that's not real genuine artificial intelligence starting from scratch because you're just hacking onto God's laws or whatever, whatever explanation you have for them. But I don't know. It seems like artificial intelligence to me if you get a mind to attach to a machine or arise out of a machine or whatever. I don't know. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. Again, I don't know from the philosophy of mind camp, at least the positions that I find most plausible. I don't think I have a way of ruling out in principle.
Yeah.
I mean, traditionally, in the tradition, right? There's a distinction drawn between substances and artifacts, right? Substances have this sort of suite of irreducible causal powers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So one might think that there's an argument there, right?
Yeah.
That the machines, that the computers are really just artifacts putting on something of a magic trick.
Yeah.
But again, maybe it could be the case that a certain complexity is achieved where you have substantial emergence, right?
Yeah.
I don't, like styrofoam, like that styrofoam a substance, right? I don't.
Yeah, right,
it's a good thing to think about, right?
Well, the substance doing the informing of the matter is it's not just an intellect well, I guess it depends on your hylomorphist view, right? But and I'm assuming you're a hylomorphist.
I incline towards that view myself.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it does. Good
so
work.
then this question I always ask my guests is like, could God put my soul in a desk? And a lot of the hylomorphists are like, no, but I'm not sure why. Why not? Like, does my soul inherently only take on a human body, like a human physical body made of carbon, or is anything that my soul embodies necessarily my body, such that it's no longer a desk as soon as my soul gets in there? So not technically, it's not, because now it's my body, right? And it kind of depends on your hylomorphist. If you're
so for certain hylomorphists, right? And of course, there's schools here, right? Camps within camps and stuff like that, right? That there's always distinctions drawn between soul and mind. They're not the same thing for a hylomorphist, right? The soul is just the organizing principle of a living thing. So if that's right, and a desk isn't a living thing, it's hard to see how you, right?
Well, what would make it a living thing is that it would be informed by maybe the intellect, my intellect. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and what is the range? I guess the thing, and this is where I think we just have an epistemological limit, right? What is the range of that form, the range of its expressions? right?
Right. And if I don't know that range, then I'm like, well,
Then maybe it
I'm
is.
not sure. I have a
Maybe,
reason
yeah,
to
right.
maybe not think so, because maybe God designed, you know what I mean? You throw in
Yeah,
God here and
you
you
could
have,
take like an
yeah.
Aristotelian optimism, right? To
Mhm.
think that like, we
Yeah.
have a kind of general sense or seemings about,
Yeah, right.
stuff like that. But again, do I have an in principle argument? Probably no, I don't think so,
And
right?
it's fun, and if they're getting upset right now, like, that's okay. This is a fun conversation to have,
This
because
is
now
how you
you're,
jam. This is how
well,
you
and
jam.
you're talking to people about deep metaphysical
Mhm.
truths in a way that you lured them in through the silly simulation hypothesis. But now you're
Right.
getting in. Good luck trying to teach them about hylomorphism up front. Hey, we're going to talk about hylomorphism and why you should spell it with an E and not an O. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
Um, Pat, actually, I wanted to ask you some theological questions about simulation
Oh
hypothesis.
boy, sure, yeah. Uh-huh.
So
I'm
we
not a
talked about.
theologian, so I'll have
Oh,
about like,
no,
an inch of depth here, but
that's
sure.
great.
Yeah.
Well, so I do like doing this one too. So, like, let's say, granted, we live in a computer simulation, we find that out or whatever. Um, and we're conscious beings, but we're made in, like, the image not of God but of base reality beings. Do you
Mhm.
think the Imago Dei would be transitive to us? Would we also be made in God's image? And do you
It's
think
a it's a
the
transitive
extent of the
thing. Uh-huh.
atonement would extend to simulated beings as well?
Yeah. Yeah, boy, that's an interesting question. So I guess maybe you should back up and I should ask because I'll be honest. I just if I'm just laying my cards on the table, I definitely don't think we're in a simulation, right? In case any
Yeah,
if,
totally.
in case anybody was like, is Pat on the fence? No, I think there's a lot of strong cumulative arguments to be made against it. So no, I don't think we are. But suppose that we are, and that you still have God as the sort of ultimate foundational explanation.
Mhm.
I guess, like, to me, it just like, the question then is, like, this is where it gets really tricky, right?
Mhm.
Would God allow something like the simulation hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
Would God allow something like this? And this is kind of where I don't think Descartes, everyone laughs at Descartes and his argument against radical skepticism. Actually don't think it's that
No.
bad. You know what I mean?
Descartes a beast. He's a giant. He stole from Augustine with the cogito, but
Right.
we can let that go. He's a beast, dude, and everyone
He's
just laughs at him. He's
Everyone
amazing.
laughs at the dude. He's a beast. I love Descartes. I love reading his meditations. Like, it
Yeah.
is like a meditation. And at the end of the day, like, I think his, like, just general argument, like, yeah, God isn't just going to let us, like, be, like, massively systematically deceived. We know that
Yeah.
there's, like, isolated instances and restricted instances of deception and hallucination,
Yeah.
but, like, he's not going to allow us to be structurally deceived, right? So
And
I think you need to, like, motivate that maybe a little bit more than Descartes does. But if you think about the nature of God and God's rationality and the purpose of creation of love and union and atonement
yeah.
and all of that,
Yeah.
I think it does give you a very strong prediction against these sort of radically, and it's a good explanation of why, like, radically skeptical scenarios are false. So if you
Yeah.
think that a hypothesis scenario is like a structurally deceptive scenario, then I think as a theist, you have reason to not go in for that, right?
Yeah. I catch that on the popular level from Christians a lot as well. The homeschooled ones especially are like,
Like,
no.
definitely it's a seeming, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
strong
Well,
seeming.
yeah, and I used to be kind of triggered by that. They'd be like, "No, because then the Bible wouldn't be true." I'm like, "Well, what? Dang it! That okay." And then it turns out, like, that is a pretty good answer. I wonder if you're
But your
yeah. Go
question
ahead.
was just assume that it is the case too,
Well, let
that
me
I'm
right
yeah.
before you jump in that, because I want to jump on the skeptical one real quick, because
Mhm.
this is good. So, Joe Schmid, I really like Joe. He's a friend of mine. I know that a lot of the classical theists are like, stupid Joe Schmid.
Oh, I
But
don't
he,
think he's stupid.
oh, that's
Just
awesome.
because somebody doesn't disagree, it is just disagrees with the kind of like
Yeah,
humor, I think is a really talented and skilled
totally.
guy, but as far as I know, he's not a theist or
No,
Christian or
right,
anything like
right,
that, right?
right.
Yeah. Mhm.
So Joe's like, hey, look, brain in the vat scenarios from the Cartesian response. If you're like a pretty hardcore skeptical theist, then, like, God allows a lot of stuff,
Right.
and his reasons are inscrutable to us.
Mhm.
So he could allow, if you're using that, he could
Right.
allow us to be in a computer simulation
Yeah.
and have a morally sufficient reason for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so
That we can ignore.
I'm not a skeptical theist. I actually agree with a number of those critiques.
Yeah,
I think you can have broad moral expectations of God.
yeah,
And so when it comes to the
yeah. Me
problem of
too.
evil, I think you just give a theodicy.
Yeah.
I
I'm with
don't
you.
I don't
Yeah.
do like I think like a very modest skeptical theism. Like, look, I might not understand every move a
Yes.
master chess player makes because
Yeah.
I don't play chess, right? But I still can expect generally reasonable like types,
I
if not
I'm so
tokens,
glad.
type of
Yeah.
deal, right?
I'm so glad. You can use it for particular instances and be like, "Look, I'd have to." So I use like the authorial analogy, and
Yeah,
I'm narratively situated. I'd have to read the whole book to know why this one evil. But at the cross, we see God using the worst
right.
evil for the greatest good. So like a modified or moderate skepticism.
Yeah,
I like that.
maybe, maybe not tokens, but types,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. That's nice.
So no, I just think skeptical theism does lead to issues where like really we can have no expectations of God. And then to me, like we're not using the principle of analogy. We're just equivocating, right? Either God's goodness means something, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
we
Oh
can
yeah,
really latch onto it and
yeah.
his rationality and like I get it, like it's stretchy, it's a stretch concept, but it's not a broken concept, like
Well,
totally
and
away
if
from
we're
us,
made in
right?
His image, right? Like that's part of the
Right.
purpose is that we
Yeah.
can know Him, and that's even
And
my
look, this is
theodicy, right?
Aquinas. This is like people think Aquinas is totally out of fact. No, Aquinas, people need to like even Thomas need to read Aquinas.
That's
Aquinas
true.
thinks like
Yeah,
God is not going to just blip the world out of existence in the next 5 seconds because that contradicts God's rationality of ordering us towards an end, right? So
yeah,
like Aquinas says we can expect with certainty that God will not do certain things, right?
yeah,
And it
yeah.
might not because God has virtues to fulfill like we do, but it flows from God's nature as, uh, the unrestricted active understanding of pure actual goodness, the
Yeah,
paradigm limit case of rationality, all
yeah.
those things, right?
I
And
might go
that's
in for His purpose and say like, well, and this might be where we're different, right? But
mhm,
like, it seems a little bit it seems pretty strong. If you go in through His nature, then it seems like He had to create it this way or keep us in existence. But if He's like, if He's planned to do that, it's
right.
like He's not going to contradict Himself, right? He
That
can't
yeah.
just do that.
And for Thomas, that comes down to what's God's ordained wisdom, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Given that God has
yeah,
this
yeah. That's
purpose, he's
good.
he's going to see it through,
Totally,
right? Yeah,
totally.
yeah. So we're
Yeah,
yeah definitely not at odds there. So
yeah.
all to say, I agree with that. This is one of the reasons I don't reject skeptical theism at all because of the simulation. I just reject it independently,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and also because I think you can actually give good, robust theodicies to the problem of evil,
Yeah, I think
right?
you're right. Yeah.
So yeah, good stuff.
Well,
Yeah,
okay, so let's say that this isn't a skeptical scenario. As Chalmers says, he uses kind of a qua move. I call it qua move because I studied theology. He doesn't do that, but qua the simulation, Neo. Let's say Neo is a sim instead of a brain in a vat.
yeah,
So he's wholly, qua the simulation. He thinks he's in New Jersey, and in the simulation, that's true. And so he has this true belief about qua simulated worlds.
hmm
But like, qua base reality, he's actually just a bunch of digits in a server in Milwaukee.
right.
So yeah, it's false,
Milwaukee,
right?
yeah.
But you do the qua move and you're like, no, dude, qua the simulation, he has justified true beliefs. If that scenario is plausible and it's not global skepticism, but he can have relative knowledge based on where he's at, then I'm just trying to remove the skepticism. Then, if we are living in a computer simulation and Christianity is true in base reality, do you think that the atonement would it atone for this? Would it
So
atone for simulated beings? It has
yeah,
the
that's a
added
really
benefit
interesting one.
of bringing in aliens, right? So if there's aliens that are sinners as well, do you think the
Right.
extent of the atonement goes to them?
Ranges over
Yeah,
them. Yeah.
ranges. Yeah, that's good.
Boy, that's a really interesting one. So Christianity is true in base reality, but what does that mean, right?
Yeah.
That like the Trinity is at the foundation of everything, but the incarnation only happened in the simulation. Is
No,
that
only happened in base reality,
it did happen in base reality?
but not simulated reality.
Oh, that my initial quick response is yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it could. I want to think about it for more than 30 seconds, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Right.
But
Right.
this is the fun of podcasts, right? You get to put
Totally.
yourself on the spot and then 30 minutes later, be like, how did I say something so stupid, right?
And I don't
Uh,
have any. I'm not trying to trap you. I don't have
no, I
anything in
know.
the
Well, no,
area to lure at you.
this is the fun stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The live. What do you think? Mhm.
Well, I think yes. I think that
Uh-huh.
if I'm a computer simulation, then looks like my metaphysical are wrong, and you can be a conscious sim. And man, I've sinned. I know myself. And
Yeah.
if Christianity is true in base reality, then God's our ultimate creator, even though that it was mediated. And so maybe people go, that's Gnosticism or something. I still believe in God. It just looks like there's a intermediate creator of our simulated world who is also made in God's image. And I think the Imago Dei would be like transitive. I don't want to give any criteria for what it means to be made in God's image, because then I'm going to necessarily leave somebody out, probably, right? Like necessarily and probably. I'll probably leave someone out if I say it's rational faculties or a moral will. Like, I don't want to lose any genuine image bearers, any human beings from that category. But it looks like it would be transitive, carrying over based on how it seems to me, right? So then, look, I've sinned, and if that's true that Christ dies for sinners, and anyone who is an image bearer who trusts in him, like if I'm a transitive image bearer, I've sinned and I trust in him, then yeah, man, it looks like the extent of the atonement reaches me as well.
Yeah. Wow, really fascinating stuff. Parker, we've been going for a bit here. I could go all day with you, but what I want to make sure we have time to get out. Any other points you wanted to make on this topic of this, if there's anything left. And of course we're going to have you on again. I would love to continue this and
same.
have,
and you got to
have many more conversations as well. But what else you got? Anything left on your list of things you wanted to?
No, man, that's fun. That was just kind of like the broad scope. There's a lot more to say here. It's a long conversation. I want people to join in. So maybe it'll, like, the last thing to say is just
give us your thoughts.
Give us your thoughts. Come on in, though. Like, the reason I like David Chalmers, I think he's a great philosopher. I'm trying to lure him into this conversation. He kind of dipped his toe in philosophy of religion. So if you're an expert in philosophy of religion, maybe don't hammer him for that. Like, don't cut his toe off so he doesn't come all the way in. Right? Like, lure him back. Hey, that's great. I've had some thoughts on this. Same thing with artificial intelligence. Now people are starting to talk about the inscrutability of super intelligent AI. And like, hey, you know what? Philosophers of religion have been talking about inscrutability for a long time. We've got some stuff to say about this. Oh, you want to talk about evil and good? We've been thinking about this for a long time. I would love to help you serve you guys by bringing some of that stuff in, instead of being like, you idiots. How could you pagan, ridiculous fool? Like, no, come on, bring them in. And we want them to hear our Christianity anyways, man. So be a little bit evangelistic in your philosophizing.
Team up. I do wish philosophy was more cooperative than competitive. Look, I like a good competition too, but
for sure, of course, it's fun to tease each other and joke, and you should ridicule them in fun. But come on, bring them in.
So this has been great. This is just, actually, it's a music analogy. So I play a good amount of music, and I love the cooperative, like the jamming. We're working together to try and create something. So invite everyone into jam. We've just been jamming here, right? We didn't come with any real, outline or anything. We just kind of just jammed, and I thought it was a ton of fun. And we invite people to jam in the comment section afterwards. Leave us your thoughts on anything you want to leave your thoughts on. But before we go, Parker, we have to make sure we mention your very good show, and where can people keep up with you? Where should they subscribe? Please give us all those good details.
Yeah, man. So begrudgingly, I am on all the social media apps.
Good for you, man.
Yeah,
I haven't been able to keep up lately. Yeah,
it's tough. I'm even on TikTok now. So shout out to the Chinese Communist Party. What's up, guys? But yeah, so go check me out on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff, Discord. But go check out my YouTube channel, Parker's Pensies. You can find it on all the audio platforms.
Great name, by the way.
Yeah, thanks, man. I know it's Pensies, but I'm an American swine. I don't speak French, so
that's the way to do it, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks again, man. I've heard a lot of my audience has said, like, you need to get on with Philosophy of the People. So thanks for having me, man. This is great.
Well, thank you, man. I think this is the beginning of many fun, fruitful conversations. And gentle listeners, please do subscribe to Parker's podcast over there. I'll link it in the show notes. Please leave your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see all of you guys next time.